Everybody, welcome back to the cabin. So Emily and I are going to continue working outside, but also working on some of those bushcraft skills that we talked about in the previous video. Rather than continue with axemanship, which is kind of advanced, I think we're going to jump onto some of the simple stuff and start right from the very basics, I guess. And probably the number one thing that's necessary to learn is how to start a fire, especially in different conditions and using different methods. Today though, it's perfect beginner type training day because it's beautiful out. It's just above freezing, it's dry and it's sunny, and we're going to start with something simple, just using a lighter or matches. So the only real challenge at this time of year, we did have a lot of rain yesterday first of all, so there is a lot of damp wood and damp twigs. And also, of course, we have snow on the ground, so we'll have to do something a little bit different than what we would do in the summer. So Emily's just collecting some firewood and some fuel and tinder and stuff for making the fire. So we have a lot of resources here, so it's not going to be too difficult. But we'll get started right now as the sap is boiling down. I'll have to keep an eye on that because it's getting close to being ready actually. So we'll just pile it anywhere here. So you'll have to collect about 10 times that amount. Okay. We'll be getting different sizes. So first, basically, what you're getting is stuff that's like pencil lead thickness. So the really small stuff, and that's going to be the first layer on the fire. This is pretty dry for how much rain we had yesterday. This tree's been down since last June, so the twigs are really dry. It's like seasoned, dried out. But like I said, we had rain yesterday, so they're a little bit damp still. So now we want a bunch of stuff that's like that, like what the thickness of your hand or your fingers pretty much. The hemlock always, it doesn't bend or break as easily. It tends to bend, which is what this is. So you kind of have to use your knee to break it into smaller pieces. Just grab that birch bark there too. So on a day like today after the rain, these conifers, these deciduous or the evergreen trees like this stop a lot of the rain, but they always have all these dead branches on the bottom. So you just break them off. See that? Breaks off really easy. That's really, really dry. And evergreens like this burn faster. They catch fire easier. And they're better than the hardwood. So like literally every pine tree or spruce tree or hemlock or fir, you go up to them, they'll have all these branches on the lower thing. See how brittle that is? It just snaps right off. No moisture in it. And most of the pine trees or conifers also have resin in them, so like an oil that catches fire easier, and it burns nice and hot. But it burns quickly. That's better, right, than the other stuff? Especially when it's lying on the ground like that birch tree. When it's down horizontal on the ground, it tends to absorb moisture and hold moisture. This is an oak tree that fell down a few years ago by the looks of it, but it's still nice and hard, like really hard. So this is what we'll use as the last thing, the fuel that burns for a long time, and it burns really hot, and it makes good coals for cooking. So if you want to come over, I'll show you how to use that. So when you start it, especially, and before it really bites in, you want to hold this steady. Problem is if it skips out and you get your finger, it'll do really bad damage. So the safest way is to actually reach through the saw. Hold that right there. Then if it comes out, it can't get on top of your hand or your wrist. Now, these saws want to twist all the time. The blade moves quite a bit. So you actually don't want to put too much pressure. When I started, I try to stay closer to one of the ends where it stays straighter. So you just get going really loosely, and then you can go for a little bit harder, put a little bit more pressure on it.
So right out my hand?
So reach through the saw. Yeah.
It feels very weird.
Yeah, it's awkward. Put your left foot forward so you're more stable. Okay, your hand, it's not bad being that far away from the saw, but it would be safer if it was in there.
It feels very weird.
I know, you have to get down lower. Yeah. You just get used to it, and you get faster too. So fast and light, and it'll cut through pretty quick. That's a really sharp saw. So this is great wood. It's nice and hard still. It's starting to rot a little bit, so it's not quite as good. But anyway, that's the hardwood for the fuel. So you want at least three different piles of thickness. You have that really fine stuff there. You got mid-sized stuff. Well, really, that's like a different size than this stuff. So that's a good progression. And I'll show you what to do with it in a minute. And then you get your bigger stuff. And we'll cheat and grab some firewood that I cut yesterday. Okay, so the challenge at this time of year is that if you build a fire right on the snow, it'll actually melt, obviously. But as it melts, it extinguishes itself, and as it tries to heat up from above, the cold is coming up from the bottom and it's making that fire cold, so it ends up going out on you eventually. So in the winter you always want to put a base down. So that'll burn eventually too, of course, but if you were just doing a quick fire to cook or something, it won't burn all the way down through this. It'll just light on top and slowly melt down. But it's actually a pretty important lesson. I almost died once because I was out with another guy, a younger guy, when I was young, and it was like minus 30 out, and I built a fire on top of the snow like that, and it just kept melting down and going out, and we almost froze because we were soaking wet too. Alright, so birch bark is the best thing we have in our woods to start a fire. If you don't have that, like really dry leaves is okay, but they typically smolder more than they burn. But this has oil in it, so if you can, like if you're just camping or something, of course you just use newspaper, but this is actually quite a bit better. But when it's thick like that, it doesn't always ignite as easy as you think it should. But the really fine stuff like that, you can ignite that with almost anything. So what you want to do is, now that we have a base layer down, you want to get this, all the finer stuff, and get it into a pile right where you want the fire to start, or right where you want to start the fire. So nice dry spot on there. It's good to get it little pieces. Even when it's wet like that, it'll still burn, but it's not as good as when it's dry, of course. The thing about any fire is that it needs lots of oxygen, so if you pack stuff too tightly, like if that's all sitting flat like that, it doesn't want to ignite because there's no oxygen in there. So you're trying to, when you're laying a fire, you're trying to get as much like elevation, sort of random stuff, so that it's sitting up higher, and that's with every layer of wood and tinder. So see, that was lots of air underneath there. See how thick that is? It's actually good for making like containers and stuff because it's waterproof. That's good.
what
That's
this thing's okay.
yeah. You can just rip it in strips. So that's tons. That's going to make quite a fire. So if you're really cold, like it's a lot of times when you're lighting a fire, your hands are cold and they're not working very well. Your hands are probably even cold right now. So you so you don't have as much dexterity. So you want to get fires going quickly. Well, that amount of birch bark, since we have so much of it, that's going to ignite really fast. So now what you want to do is get all your smallest stuff, and again, lots of air. So that would be a little bit thicker, but the ends of it are pretty thin. And all the stuff that we collected from the dry pine, or dry hemlock. But see how small that is? It's literally like a pencil lead. Like that stuff you could, it's basically the thickness of a match. So you could light that and it would burn. So you know it's going to catch really easily with that. You just take a pile like this and put it right on top of the birch bark. And you could also have started the birch bark first and then put it on so it doesn't smother.
All of that?
Oh, that's good now, but then be ready as soon as that ignites, then grab this pile and put it on. But this is not a good place to lay it because it's laying in the snow. But what you want to do is, because you don't want to fail at this, because if you're freezing, you need that fire as quickly as possible. So by having everything really close and in piles already, what you're going to do is just light that, grab this, put it on, and then when that gets nice and hot, then you're going to grab this bigger stuff and put it on. Then when all that ignites, you can take the really big stuff and put it on. Always keeping lots of air in there, so trying to keep it up nice and high. So in this case, we'll just use a lighter. Lighters do freeze actually. So if that wasn't in my pocket, if it was just sitting out, it's potential that it wouldn't have lit. But being in my pocket at all times, and I always have them in pockets, and often in a little bag too to keep them dry.
No matter where?
Yeah, anywhere underneath. Down lower, you want to make sure that the fire is coming up and hitting something else. Like you wouldn't want to light the top, in other words.
Yeah.
See that? That black smoke? That's the oil on the birch bark burner. It's already throwing off heat. Like if you were cold and your hands weren't working very well yet, you could keep them at least close to that. And then it's catching all the small stuff right away. So now you can put that on. The other thing is that we should have looked for first, which I did, but you want to make sure there's no trees that are going to catch fire above the fire or next to it, and that there's no snow up in trees that if it gets hot and melts, it comes down and hits the fire. Puts it out. So that's not a good placement of that. We should look at the wind first. Make sure we didn't have anything downwind. See this dark smoke here? That means that's smothered, and that's probably because of the leaves. When they're packed like that, there's no oxygen in there, so that's just too dense, too close together right there. But that's burning really nicely. So you can start bringing the thicker stuff on. So it's more like your finger thickness, your thumb thickness. And same thing, you want a random pattern, so kind of put them in. Yep. Perfect. You can keep going with that too. This tree I'm actually cutting down, so you wouldn't typically put a fire that close to a tree that you could catch on fire. You can see it's starting to melt down already. The snow is already getting warm from the sun. It's starting to melt, but that'll burn long enough. It will catch that stuff on the bottom, the logs, but eventually that'll even put itself out. So you do want to keep it really hot, like keep putting big stuff on. Ideally, you would have a fire, so you would shovel the snow out of the way first. Get it down on the ground. And then there's all the fear of, you have to be careful that you don't ignite anything under the ground or on top of the ground, because these roots from these trees over here, especially the hemlocks and the pines, they stay close to the surface. And if you have a fire on top like this, you can actually catch the roots on fire, and that fire, well, you won't even know that it's on fire. It could pop out of the ground like a week later. Just keep burning underground. So we might as well talk about cooking on the fire too then. So what we're mostly burning is the lighter stuff, that hemlock and the small branches from the birch. It's never really great to cook on a on actual flame because it burns stuff too quickly. It doesn't cook it properly. Flame is great for boiling water though, so that would be perfect fire to boil a kettle of water or to purify water. But if you're cooking, what you want is coals. Soft woods like that, like the pine and stuff, doesn't actually make coals. It actually just burns completely and turns to ash. So when you want coals to cook on, you burn the hardwood like this oak or maple, and that'll turn into, you know, when you see the embers in the bottom of a fire that are really hot, you don't get that with softwood, you only get it with hardwood really. So this would be great for cooking like a steak that you need a long hot fire that doesn't have too much flame. When we were trying to burn the fire the other day, we had not enough flame because we were using hardwood.
What, one over there?
In the thing? In the wood stove, hardwood burns nice and hot, but it's the flame that's the hottest that gets things boiling. It's probably getting close to ready, that's that too. To get another batch on. That's why you always need a stick kind of to keep the oxygen in there. What happens is the fire starts collapsing, and right there, see all that stuff's really packed tight together. That's what a poker is for, essentially. So you want air in there, so you have to kind of poke around, get it elevated, get some air under. But this is already starting to melt down into the ground a bit too. So once you're done with your fire, even if you think that it is out, there's any heat at all on there, you always have to douse it. Even in the winter, the risk is low at this time of year, but like that hemlock could still catch fire if it's sparked up. So you never want to leave a fire unattended, or you don't want to ever leave and not have it fully extinguished. In the winter it's easy, you just pile snow on it until it smothers it and melts and puts it out with water. Lots of fires in Algonquin, several fires even last year that were caused by people not using the fire pit. Usually a fire pit you always put rocks underneath, or you put it on sandy soil like mineral soil. If you burn on organic soil, like stuff like this with all the leaves and stuff in it, that's when it spreads or catches the roots underneath. You always want to choose like building on top of a rock or something is always the best thing, around a beach or something. And then really leave no trace. So many people camping everywhere in the woods that you don't want burned wood and fire pits all over the place. You try to use existing fire pits, but if you do burn just anywhere like this, typically what I would do is douse the fire and then take the logs and kind of spread them around into the forest so that they can just decompose naturally without looking like somebody's been there. That's called leave no trace. So no trace of you being there. That's it. When you open up a fire like that, like take the logs away from each other, they stop fueling one another, stop giving heat, so they go out quicker, like that. And you can either scatter that in the bush or save it for another fire if it's your spot or your own property. Yeah, that's still smoking.
What?
Probably put it on leaves. I did. Thanks for watching that short video. Obviously Emily has started fires in the past, especially when we used to camp quite a bit when they were younger, but she probably hasn't started one in quite a while. Now, what we showed, or what I showed her, the lesson we went over was very, very basic. Fire lighting is something I kind of take for granted because I use it every day essentially, between of course keeping the cabin warm in the summer or in the winter, and then the sauna as well. The outdoor kitchen, the rocket stove, the like the grill in the outdoor kitchen, and the earthen oven. Then I have my fire pit. Then my camping trip. So I cook almost exclusively on fire. So I have to start one every day. And then of course heating as well. So I do take it for granted. Now when my wife and I went and visited a lodge a few years ago, ice fishing, the lodge owner was telling us how to start the fire in the ice hut. And we thought that was kind of funny. And she said, you'd be surprised how many people can't light a fire. That she has to go out there and either give them a propane heater or show them how to light that fire or light it herself. And you know, I think the main reason for that is that people don't appreciate the steps, the how fire spreads and how it ignites. And that typically means, well, tell you what they're doing wrong. Typically most people try to go right from essentially a tinder or a really light kindling like paper, for example, and try to light a log or a piece of wood that's too thick, forgetting those intermediate steps like these fine twigs that catch fire. In fact, it's a really good technique is just to take a bunch of these thin little twigs like this and light that with a match or lighter, and that now becomes your lighter. That becomes your ignition source. You can, with all these branches burning, it's going to stay lit a lot longer than a match, and you can go around and light the rest of your wood. So these are great, like I was showing Emily. Actually, this whole tree's dead hemlock. See, these are really dry softwood twigs, so they'll burn like crazy. And then there's all these other branches on here. But like I said, I take that for granted, and that's why I thought we'll just stick with the basics in that video, because there's a lot to know about fires for different uses. You know, the long lay that I would typically do if I was lying down sleeping by a fire, and I don't want to expend too much energy cutting short pieces of firewood. You can just use a bunch of long logs or pieces of branches and lay those down and light that fire so it's the full length and it's giving off heat that full length. That's just one of quite a few different ways, but predominantly, like I said, I'm cooking, and then secondary for me is warmth. So cooking fires are a lot different than building a big flame fire for warmth, especially like a real warming fire. Like if I was to get cold, and I have obviously done that on canoe trips or spring trips, hiking or backpacking or on canoe trips, getting damp right through and kind of getting hypothermic and needing that great big fire. So in that case, you get a great big flame and it throws off enough heat to warm you fully and dry out your clothes. So we're going to get into more detail in the next couple of videos. I'll do more on fire. It's probably something I'll revisit with Emily and whoever else in my family is going to learn from me as well. Obviously my wife is learning things every day from me, but there's lots to learn still. So we'll continue to fire different fire techniques and fire lighting techniques in all of or a lot of the future videos as well. Anyway, this is the calm before the storm. It's beautiful right now, relatively mild, snow's melting, but we have periods of rain starting tonight, so it's going to be a different environment out here tomorrow and in damp conditions. In fact, maybe we'll practice fire lighting in those conditions. But welcome to spring. This is great. Happy to easy winter, but still happy it's over and looking forward to the seasons coming up. So thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to see you at the cabin next time. Take care.